nothing was worth anything really, comparatively speaking. What did I... oh yes, I swapped it for when I got a proper job. All my sort of chums were on MGBs and stuff like that. I was sort of still into biking really, and I used to commute to work on my little Honda Cub, and I had a pre-unit Triumph, and I decided that they were all buying MGBs, and I wasn't that keen on the iron engine on that. I mean, it's a good solid engine, but you know, it's a bit staid. So what did I do? I bought a 4.2 fixed head coupe E-Type in black with chrome wires, somewhat rusty wires. And oh, I didn't get on with that car. I know today they're worth a fortune, but they weren't then. And I remember going round a roundabout, a concrete road it was, and it was a damp day in the winter, and I accelerated out of the bed of the roundabout, and the back end went. And oh my God, was it difficult to handle. It was going in all directions. So I realised that you had to be a bit careful with this thing, because the chassis wasn't all that fantastic as far as I could make out, and it was ridiculously expensive to run. I don't think I ever got more than about 13 or 14 to a gallon. I mean, people tell you they're more economical than that, but this one wasn't. And there were issues and one thing and another, and I ended up swapping it for a 6-month-old Triumph Trident. And that was okay. The design wasn't bad, but I kept getting fueling problems with it on the centre pot. It used 3 concentric carbs, and I richened up the middle one, but it still caused problems, and I actually pulled 2 pistons over its lifetime on the centre pot. And the bike was quite thirsty. I mean, you were lucky to get 35 out of my Trident, and it wasn't in bad condition. You know, the compression was good, at least when the pistons were okay. And people like them now, and they call them classics, and well, why not? But I stuck with that one. I couldn't really afford to do anything else, because I was running my little car at the time, which I've still got, a little Ford, which was always totally reliable. And I had my little Honda Cub, which I used for commuting. And the only big bike was the Trident. So I stuck with it, and I did 35,000 miles on that bike. Not all of them without trouble. I put the very first Boyer Branston solid state ignition system on it, and that failed twice. And of course, with electronic ignition, if it fails, you've had it. You just have to push your bike or get it home. And that put me off electronic ignition for an awful long time. Because if anyone that's got a Trident know, you've got 3 sets of contact breakers, and it can be a bit of a faff to sort out. But once they, like all contact breakers, providing you get good quality ones, I mean, they go on for ages. So would I want one now? No. Would I call it a classic? No. Would I call the 69 Bonneville a classic? Yes. It was before the oil in frame Triumphs came out, and before they bored them out to 750, which was a ball too far. They were very vibratory. I only rode one once, just enough to realise I didn't want one of those. But I remember when I had the Trident, I went into Motorcycle City, which was the big bike shop at the time, and there was a dealer there, and he was bored and wanted to go out and on a bike. So he said, would you like a test ride on this bike? And it was a Honda, which I always like Hondas. And so I said okay. He said, well, if you're not interested, we'll just go for a run and you sit on the pillion. And I remember that bike, he got on, eventually did one stop on a motorway, and that bloody thing was as fast as my Trident 2 up, and I think it could have towed my Trident and was quick. And it was a GL 1000 when they just came out, which I think is about 76. And at the time, that flat 4 was one of the fastest bikes on the road. Sounds odd to say that, but if you actually look at the details, the GL 1000 around 76 was a very quick motorcycle. And I absolutely loved it, and I thought, wow, what a bike is this? But again, I couldn't really justify change, and I stuck with the Trident. And then the Trident ended up in the back of the garage, and by that time I'd got a motor caravan, and I wanted a small bike to take on our camping trips. So I wanted an ST70, which is like it's a little bit bigger than a monkey bike, but it does fold down a bit. So I bought an ST70 and sold the Trident. And then the Pikeys stole the ST70. I kept that for years, and where I used to live there were lots of Pikeys, and they would steal anything that wasn't bolted down. And they stole the bike, and no one was interested, of course. The police aren't interested. They just give you a number and tell you to get in touch with the insurance. And of course the insurance said, well, it's worthless. Well, it was sort of worthless back then, but it was immaculate. But they nicked it, and they nicked other things from me over the years, and I certainly would never ever live anywhere near a traveller's encampment ever again. There was an official one, a council one, about 2 miles away, and those guys knew absolutely everything everyone had got, and they even stole a beech hedge after it had been put in. That night they went and pulled the beech hedge out, but someone was coming home late and they did nab them for that, thankfully. So we're coming back to what's a classic. Well, if it looks like a classic, is it a classic? Well, no, not really. If it just looks old school, that's one thing, but as far as the Interceptor goes, I made a mistake. It just wasn't quick enough. You know, I'm just cruising along here, but I can just open the throttle and I'll be doing 150. But I'm happy to cruise along today, no rush. And I was glad to see the back of it, because my chum Laurie, who runs an old school type motorcycle shop, a small one, he knew I was an X11 fiend, although he could never understand why. And well, that I also like the Blackbird. And he said, I've got a pristine Blackbird that's come in. Would you like to have a go? Well, I didn't have a go. I went there and I saw the bike, which I'm sitting on. And I said, oh, stuff it, I'm having it. And I wrote him a check. And I said, can you get rid of the Interceptor for me? So he came up with a plan whereby he would sell it for me, and he would take a cut, which saves me a lot of messing around. And also I don't have to deal with people who are going to ask how did you get on with it? And I don't really want to say I didn't get on with it, I didn't like it. So he came and collected it, and the first thing he had to do was then take it back to the dealers, which was 45 miles away, and get them to sort the starter out, which as I said earlier had failed. And I checked it down as far as all the connections, but I just got fed up with it. I had other things I'd rather be doing than messing around with old bikes I don't, well, new bikes I don't like. So he took it off my hands, and I was very pleased to see that bike disappear in the back of his van. And so for me the Interceptor was a failure. I didn't like really anything about it. The finish, in spite of what other you see, Enfield riders tend to be very apologetic about their machines, and they sort of stand up for them, which is understandable. I mean, if you've paid out for these things, you're not going to say oh, I think I've made a mistake. You're going to do what I did with the Trident and live with it. And most of them enjoy it and potter about and never go on motorways, so they don't need what I'm going to do now. Right, well, as you see, that's 6-gear roll on. You can't do that with an Enfield. If you're cruising at 80-ish, if you open the throttle in 6th gear, and the gearbox is very good incidentally, very little happens. So there you go. Most people seem to love them. I hated it. I absolutely loathed that bike, and I wouldn't. I just used anything instead. I used to walk past it. It lived next door to my Hayabusa, and of course there was no. What are you going to do? You're going to get a Hayabusa or a bloody Interceptor. So it never got used. I found myself using other bikes, even the old classic 650 BSA instead. And incidentally, if you want to feel attached to a motorcycle, then do have a go on a classic, a proper one, because it's just a superb experience. And they don't have to be unreliable either. They never really were unreliable. The problem was that as kids, we couldn't afford to do anything other than polish them up, and they were worn out when we got them. I remember my chum John had an A10 like mine with a chair on it, and it was absolutely clapped out, but it went for years, totally clapped out, smoke coming out the back. Still pulled that old chair. So you know, comparing the Interceptor to what I would say was close to a classic, my old A10, although it certainly wasn't a classic in the day, because the Golden Flash was just a cooking 650, you know, that people hauled very large chairs with. But now I reckon you could call it a classic. Incidentally, I think anything that is actually brand new and called a classic isn't really a classic.